The eastern wall came down at dawn. Not slowly, not with warning. It came down the way mountains fall in earthquakes. One moment it stood, and the next it was powder and smoke rolling across the ground like a living thing. Kael'va pressed his back against the broken foundation of what used to be the garrison command post and listened to the sound of his people dying 30 meters away. The Draken had been shelling the colony of Verath 6 for 11 days. 11 days of the sky turning orange with plasma bursts, of the ground vibrating so constantly that Kael had stopped noticing it until it stopped for 30 seconds, and the silence felt like a wound. His unit had started with 42 soldiers. He could count the ones still breathing without using all his fingers. Sub-Commander Yis crawled to his side through the rubble, her left arm in a field wrap that had gone brown with dried fluid. She held a communicator in her good hand. Her eyes, all 4 of them, were flat and still in the way Verath eyes went when a soldier had moved past fear into something colder. "Fleet confirmation," she said. Her voice did not shake. She had been a soldier for 30 years and she would not let her voice shake now. "Our second fleet group has been destroyed in orbit. The third is not responding." Kael looked at the communicator. The screen showed a star map of the Verath 6 system. The icons representing friendly ships had gone dark one by one over the past 6 hours until the display looked like a funeral. A handful of red markers, Draken fleet signatures, moved through the system with the slow, patient confidence of things that have already won. "The civilian shelters?" he asked. "Still sealed, 7,000 inside. The deepest ones are reinforced well enough to survive bombardment." She paused. "They will not survive what comes after the bombardment." Kael understood what she meant. When the Draken stopped shelling, they would send ground troops into the rubble to finish the work. The Draken did not leave survivors as a policy, not on colony worlds, not when the colony had resisted. Verath 6 had resisted. Every soldier still breathing in these ruins had made that choice with full knowledge of what it cost. He thought about the 7,000 civilians below the ground. He thought about the children among them. He thought about how they would hear the shelling stop and think it meant safety. He stopped thinking about it. "How long until they move ground units in?" he asked. "An hour, maybe less. Their forward units are already at the perimeter." Kael pulled himself up enough to look over the broken wall. The forward edge of the Draken advance was visible at the far end of what had been the colony's main road, a wide formation of armored units moving with steady, mechanical patience. They had numbers. They had armor. They had complete orbital control. They were not in a hurry because they did not need to be. He slid back down. Yis was watching him. "We hold the civilian shelters as long as we can," he said. It was not a plan. It was a statement of intent, which was the only thing left when plans ran out. She nodded. She had expected nothing less and nothing more. He checked his energy cells. One full cell, one at 30%. He set the partial cell aside and loaded the full one. Around him, the survivors of his unit were doing the same quiet arithmetic, counting what they had, measuring it against what was coming, making the numbers work in their heads because making the numbers work was the only control they had left. Then Ren, the youngest soldier in the unit, a boy barely past his first service year who still flinched at loud sounds when he thought no one was watching, grabbed Kael's arm with both hands. "Commander, the sky." Kael looked up. The cloud cover over Verath 6 was thick and gray and had been for days, lit from below by the orange glow of burning structures. But through a break in the clouds to the north, something was moving. Not Draken ships, he knew those silhouettes by now. These were different, longer. The hull configuration was wrong for anything in the Draken fleet. 3 vessels, large, moving in a hard, fast descent arc that did not match any standard orbital approach pattern he had ever seen. Yis had her optics up. She said nothing for several seconds. "Verath Alliance transponder codes," she said finally, "but the ships are not ours." "What are they?" She lowered the optics. Her 4 eyes met his with an expression he had no name for because he had never seen it on her face before. "Human," she said. Kale had heard of humans. Most of the Varath Alliance had heard of humans by then, the way you hear about a distant storm, as a thing that exists, that has a reputation, that you hope stays far away from you. The Alliance had accepted their application for membership 2 years ago. There had been diplomatic meetings and trade agreements and formal ceremonies that Kale had paid no attention to, because none of it had seemed relevant to a garrison soldier on a colony world at the edge of the system. He had never seen a human ship. He watched the 3 vessels punch through the cloud layer at an angle that made his chest tighten instinctively, the animal part of his brain registering the speed as wrong, too fast for a controlled landing, too steep for any sane descent. Then the ships leveled, barely, just enough. And then the ships opened. Not the landing bays, the hulls. Panels blew outward, and from each vessel in clusters dozens of small objects fell. They trailed fire as they dropped. They were falling too fast. They were going to hit the ground and become craters. Kale started to look away. The objects slowed. Not all at once, in stages, controlled bursts, each one correcting, adjusting, reading the ground below it and responding. They spread as they fell, separating from clusters into individuals, covering a wide arc across the northern approach to the colony. Some came down in the rubble fields, some landed on the road, some hit the open ground between the ruins and the Draken forward line. Each one hit with a sound like a hammer striking an anvil. And each one stood up. Kale had stopped breathing. He was not aware of it. He was watching the northern approach fill with figures, upright, bipedal, covered in armor that caught no light and gave nothing away, moving the moment their feet touched the ground, not pausing, not gathering, not waiting for orders to filter down. Moving toward the Draken line. Yis said very quietly, "There are so many of them." She was right. Kale counted and lost count and started again. Over 200 had come down in the first wave. Even as he watched, more pods were falling from the ships above, which had swung into a wide holding orbit and were now tracking back for another pass. His communicator chimed. The screen showed an incoming signal on an Alliance emergency frequency. The text was in Varath script, auto-translated from whatever language the sender had used. It was short. It said, "Varath 6 Garrison, hold your position. Do not fire on our units. We have the northern approach. Human Forces, Advance Element 42nd Drop Brigade. We are here." Kale read it twice. He looked at the figures moving across the broken road toward the Draken line. He looked at the ships overhead, still deploying, still dropping fire and soldiers into the ruins of his colony. He looked at Yis, who was watching him. "What do we do?" Ren asked. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Kale looked back at the northern approach. 200 and climbing, moving fast, moving without hesitation into a Draken position that had spent 11 days turning this colony into a ruin. "We hold," he said, "and we watch." What happened in the next 4 minutes did not look like a battle. Kale had been in battles. He knew what they looked like, the grinding advance and retreat, the exchange of fire across held positions, the slow mathematics of attrition wearing both sides down, until one of them ran out of will before the other ran out of soldiers. This did not look like that. The human advance element hit the outer edge of the Draken forward position at a speed that did not seem possible for ground troops in full armor. Kale had his optics up now, tracking the contact point, and what he saw made the part of his brain that understood tactics go very quiet. They did not stop at the edge of the Draken formation. They went through it. Not around the flanks, not in a held line advancing meter by meter. They went through the center, a concentrated wedge moving so fast that the Draken units on the flanks were still turning to respond when the leading edge of the human formation had already punched 40 meters past the contact point and was spreading outward from the inside. A soldier Cale would later know as Connor Webb led the wedge. At that moment, Cale did not know his name. He only saw a figure in dark armor who moved like something that had calculated every angle in the space before entering it, who fired with a precision that did not look hurried even at full sprint, who dropped behind cover and was up again before Cale's mind had registered the crouch. The Draken forward units were good soldiers. Cale would give them that even now, even with the ruins of his colony around him. They responded fast. They shifted formation, tried to close the gap the humans had punched through, brought their heavy weapons to bear on the human flanks. A soldier on the human right flank, Cale would come to know her as Lena Price, a name he practiced until he could say it without effort, peeled away from the main advance with 3 others, and took the Draken heavy weapon position from behind before it could fully rotate. She did not stop moving while she did it. The whole action took 11 seconds. Cale counted because counting was the only way his mind could process what it was watching. His communicator chimed again. "Garrison Commander, this is Webb, Human Forces Advance Element. We are pushing the Draken line back toward the ridge at Grid 7. We need your units to hold the shelter access points. Do not let any Draken ground forces circle back to the civilian sectors. Can you confirm?" Cale stared at the message. Webb, the figure he had been watching tear through the Draken formation, was also managing his communicator, mid-engagement, issuing requests for coordination across units, simultaneously. Yis was reading over his shoulder. "They are multitasking," she said. The word in Verath carried a slightly confused undertone, the way you might describe someone doing something physically improbable. Not impossible, just improbable. "Confirm," Cale sent back. He looked at his remaining soldiers, 9 of them. 9, where 42 had stood 11 days ago. They were watching the northern approach with expressions that Cale recognized, the specific look of soldiers who have accepted death and are now being asked to revise that acceptance on very short notice. It required a different kind of courage than dying did. It required choosing to try again. "On your feet," he said. "We hold the shelter access points. Let the humans do what they do." They moved. Getting his unit into position meant crossing 400 meters of open ground between collapsed structures, because the roads were no longer roads, and the direct routes were no longer direct. Cale moved his people through it fast, using cover, using the smoke still rising from morning impacts. Twice, they drew fire from Draken flanking units that had not yet been engaged by the human advance. Twice, they returned fire and kept moving. They reached the shelter access points, 3 reinforced hatches set into the bedrock, disguised under rubble that hadn't entirely hidden them from a trained eye. Cale posted his soldiers in overlapping positions covering all 3. To the north, the battle was loud in a way that was different from the past 11 days of bombardment. The bombardment had been percussion rhythm without direction. This was structured noise. Concentrated fire, then movement, then fire again from a different position. The humans were not holding a line. They were flowing around and through obstacles, constantly repositioning, keeping the Draken units from ever having a stable target. Owen Hart came over a low wall to Cale's left without announcement and crouched beside him. Cale recognized the armor type as human, but had not heard the approach at all, which by itself was remarkable. Owen was what the humans called a scout, lighter armor, more equipment attached to the helmet, eyes that moved constantly in small, rapid sweeps. "You the garrison commander," Owen said. His translation device rendered the words in passable Verath, flat but understandable. "Yes, Cale va." "Owen," he pointed northeast. "There are about 40 Draken infantry trying to work around the human right flank. They are going to come through that collapsed storage building and try to reach the south shelter access from behind. Your people will not see them coming from their current positions." Cale looked at the storage building. Owen was right. The angle was wrong for 3 of his positions. "How many of your people can you spare?" Cale asked. "None right now. That is why I am here." Owen looked at him. He had the eyes of someone who had made many fast decisions in high-pressure situations and had learned to trust the first one. If you can shift 2 of your soldiers to the south corner, and if you can hold for 10 minutes, Webb will have the flank clear and I can loop back. Can you guarantee 10 minutes? Owen thought about it for 1 second. That single second of honest consideration told Cale more about him than any words could have. A liar would have said yes immediately. No, Owen said. But Webb has not failed to clear a flank in the 4 years I have worked with him, so probably yes. Cale shifted 2 of his soldiers. Owen disappeared back over the wall as quietly as he had arrived. Cale pressed himself against the foundation and watched the storage building and waited. 6 minutes later, the 40 Draken infantry came through the collapsed structure exactly where Owen had said they would. They came fast, clearly expecting no defense on this approach, and they ran directly into 2 Varath soldiers who had been waiting behind cover in the south corner for 6 minutes and were completely ready. The action lasted less than 2 minutes. When it was over, Cale had 1 soldier with a minor wound, and the southern access point was secure. He sent a short confirmation to Webb's communicator. The reply came back in 8 seconds. Good, hold it, we are almost through the ridge. Cale looked north. The noise of the battle there had changed again, less exchange, more pursuit. The Draken line had not broken yet, but it was bending, pulling backward toward the ridge under pressure that had not relented since the first human boot hit the ground. Yiss moved to Cale's side. She had her optics on the northern engagement, watching the human units work with an expression of professional attention that he recognized. She was studying them, storing it, the way a good soldier always studied anyone who was better at something than them. They do not stop, she said. No. In 11 days the Draken never stopped pressing either. She lowered the optics. But the Draken stopped to regroup, to consolidate gains. Every few hours there was a pause. Cale understood what she was saying. The humans had been on the ground for less than 30 minutes. There had been no pause. They are afraid of pausing, she said. It was not a criticism. It was an observation delivered with quiet respect. If they stop, they lose the pressure, so they have built themselves into something that does not stop. Cale thought about that. He thought about the drop, the way the pods had fallen too fast and then corrected, the way each figure had stood and moved in the same breath. He thought about a species that trained itself to fall from the sky at killing speed and stand up running. What does a thing like that cost them? He asked. Yiss watched the battle. Ask them when it is over, she said. The ridge was a long shelf of broken rock that ran along the northern edge of the colony, and the Draken had been using it for 3 days as a covered position for their heaviest equipment. When the human advance pushed the Draken ground forces back against it, the heavy equipment opened fire directly into the engagement at ranges that would have been suicidal under any normal tactical doctrine. Normal tactical doctrine assumed that you cared about your own troops. The Draken command had decided they did not care about the ground units at the ridge. They had decided the ridge held something more valuable, and they were right. Cale watched through his optics as the heavy fire tore through the advance line, and the human units went to ground, spread thin, suddenly unable to press forward. Connor Webb's voice came through the communicator, clipped and steady. We have a siege platform at the ridge, tracked Class 4, 2 main guns. It is dug in behind the rock shelf. Direct approach is closed until someone removes it. Dale, I need options. Dale Finn's reply came on the shared channel 3 seconds later. Dale was the unit's demolition specialist, a broad-shouldered man with very quiet eyes who Cale had noticed earlier in the engagement for the way he moved. Always slightly apart from the main action, always looking at structures and terrain rather than at enemies, calculating things that other people did not see yet. I see it, Dale said. The rock shelf is sitting on a secondary fault line from the orbital bombardment. There are stress fractures running under the platform's western track. If I can get a shaped charge against the base of the shelf, the whole face comes down on top of it. Time: 12 minutes to get there, 3 minutes to place, if I run. A pause. In the pause, the siege platform fired again. The ground shook. Cale felt it under his feet where he stood 400 meters south. "Do it," Webb said. Cale found Dale in his optics. The man was already moving, angling east along the base of a collapsed structure, keeping the rubble between himself and the ridge. He was not running in a straight line. He was running in the way that a person runs when they understand geometry, always behind something, always moving at angles that kept him invisible from the ridge. Lena Price fell into step 40 meters behind him. She had not been told to. She had simply decided to go. "Price," Dale's voice on the channel, "I do not need an escort." "I know," she said, and kept going. She was his medic. Cale understood that without being told, because of the way she moved, always slightly reactive, always scanning for the moment after the action rather than the action itself. She had saved 3 Verath soldiers in the first hour. She had stopped in the middle of the advance, in the middle of fire, and pulled an injured Verath soldier behind cover, and treated him with the same focused calm she apparently applied to everything. Cale had not known what to do with that. He still did not. He filed it and kept watching. Dale reached the base of the ridge shelf in 11 minutes. He pressed against the rock and began working without visible hesitation, unpacking equipment from a side carrier with practiced hands. The siege platform was 30 meters above him and slightly north. It fired twice more while he worked. Each time the ground shook, and each time Dale's hands continued moving. Lena was 10 meters back, watching the approaches from the east. She said nothing. She did not check on Dale's progress. She trusted him to do his part and did hers. Carl Stone arrived from the south without announcement. Another human soldier Cale had been tracking. A quiet man who had not said a single word on the communications channel in the entire engagement, but who had been, without apparent effort, in the exact right position every time the line needed someone there. He crouched beside Lena without speaking. She glanced at him and went back to watching the approaches. Carl checked his equipment and watched the ridge above Dale. 3 people at the base of a ridge, one of them placing a charge that would bring several hundred tons of rock down 2 meters from where they were standing. On the communications channel, Webb was still managing the rest of the engagement, holding the forward line in place, rotating units to keep pressure on the Draken flanks so they could not redirect forces to the ridge. He did this while tracking Dale's progress and watching the siege platform, and managing the shared channel for 62 soldiers in active contact. Cale listened to his voice and heard no elevation, no crack, no sign that any of this was harder than a training exercise. He thought about what that kind of calm costs, what you give up, or build up, or burn down inside yourself to get there. "Charges placed," Dale said, moving to safe distance. Dale moved fast, low, back the way he had come. Lena and Carl moved with him without needing to be told, the 3 of them opening ground from the ridge in a tight, controlled sprint. "Webb," Dale said, "ready. All units pull back 30 meters, now." Cale told his own soldiers to brace. He gripped the foundation beside him and looked at the ridge and waited. The detonation was quieter than he expected. A sharp crack, not a boom. Then the rock face moved. Not explosively. It tilted. The way a wall tilts when its foundation gives. Slowly at first, with a grinding sound that built as more weight committed to the fall, and then faster, and then it came down in a single mass that hit the ground with a sound that Cale felt in his chest and his teeth and the base of his skull. The dust cloud went up like a slow wave. When it began to settle, the ridge shelf was gone. The siege platform was buried under 40 meters of broken rock. On the channel, Webb said, "Advance." They went forward. What happened in the next 40 minutes was not a battle anymore. It was a door closing. The Draken forces that had been pressing Verath 6 for 11 days, that had destroyed its fleet and shelled its structures to powder, found themselves between a human advance that had not paused once since making contact and a rubble field that now had no cover worth using. They had no siege platform. Their orbital support was not firing into their own ground troops' position. Their command structure, Kale learned later, had lost 3 senior officers in the first 10 minutes of the engagement. Not to luck, but to a specific targeting priority. The human advance element had been running from the moment they landed. Take out the commanders first, always. The Draken withdrawal began in pieces, units pulling back individually rather than on a coordinated order, because the coordinated orders were not coming from anyone anymore. A withdrawal in pieces becomes something else fast. Kale had seen it happen to his own people over the past 11 days, the terrible acceleration of it, the way a line that is bending becomes a line that is breaking in what feels like a single breath. He watched it happen to the Draken. Webb's advance element moved through the collapse with the same rhythm it had maintained all day, measured, constant, not triumphant. They did not chase the Draken units that were running. They let them run and held the ground they had taken and kept their formation intact. A different kind of soldier might have broken discipline in that moment and pushed beyond what was needed. These ones did not. Kale walked north through the ruins of his colony to the forward edge of where the human line had settled. Smoke was still rising from a dozen points. The orange sky of the morning had gone pale blue, the kind of afternoon light that felt inappropriate for what the ground looked like. He had his sidearm in his hand, not because he expected to need it, but because he had not yet made the conscious choice to put it away. Webb was standing at the edge of the road, looking north toward where the Draken withdrawal was disappearing over the far hills. He was not on his communicator. He was just standing there, his helmet off, held at his side. He was younger than Kale had imagined from the voice on the channel. He had a face that looked like it had spent a long time being tired and had made its peace with that. Kale stopped a few meters away. He did not know human greetings well enough to trust himself. He did not know the appropriate gesture for what this moment was. There was no word in his language for what a person owed someone who had come from across the galaxy and fallen out of the sky to stand between 7,000 civilians and the thing that was coming for them. He put his sidearm away. That felt like the right start. Webb looked at him. His eyes were gray and steady, and they held no performance in them, no expectation of gratitude, no pride that needed witnessing. Just the look of a person who had done a job and was already thinking about the next one. "How are your people?" Webb asked. His translation device rendered it simply. Kale thought about the 9 soldiers he had left. He thought about the 33 who were not standing in this road. He thought about the 7,000 below the ground who did not yet know it was over. "Alive," Kale said, "because of you." Webb looked at him for a moment. Then he shook his head just slightly. "Alive because your people held 11 days," he said. "We just closed the door." Lena walked past behind them, headed south toward the shelter access points with a medical kit over one shoulder. She glanced at Kale as she passed and gave a small nod, the universal acknowledgement of someone who has too much work still ahead to stop and talk. He nodded back. Owen appeared from somewhere to the east, already pulling up a terrain map on a handheld unit, already planning the next thing. Dale was helping 2 Verath soldiers move debris off a section of collapsed structure, working alongside them without a word passing between them, because no words were needed for lifting things together. Carl sat on a broken section of wall and looked at the sky with the expression of a man who was allowing himself 30 seconds to simply be still before the next thing started. Kale watched them, these creatures who had built themselves into something that fell from orbit and did not stop, who had come to a world that was not theirs, for people they had never met, at a cost he could not yet calculate and that they did not seem interested in discussing, who closed the door and said, "You held." Above, the 3 human vessels were still in orbit, moving in slow, holding patterns. Kale's communicator showed their transponder signatures clearly now. 42nd Drop Brigade, Human Forces, Advance Element. He read the designation again. Advance Element. A word for the first piece of a larger thing. He looked at Webb. "Are more of your people coming?" he asked. Webb looked up at the ships. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, not quite something else. "They already are," he said. Kale looked at the sky. He stood in the ruins of his colony, with 9 soldiers instead of 42, with 7,000 civilians still sealed underground waiting for a signal that it was safe to come up, with the smell of 11 days of burning still thick in the air. He stood in all of that and looked up at the sky, and felt something he had not felt since the eastern wall came down at dawn. Something that had no good word in any language, in the end. Something that felt like a door opening where only a wall had been before. He opened his communicator and sent the signal to the civilian shelters. 3 short pulses, the agreed code for all clear. He imagined the sound of it reaching the deep bunkers, imagined the moment it was received, imagined the first breath 7,000 people would take when they understood it was over. He stood in the broken road and waited for them to come up. Above him, the human ships held orbit, steady and patient, and somewhere beyond the far hills the Draken were still running and would not stop running for a long time, and in the ruins of a colony that should have been a grave, human soldiers moved quietly through the smoke doing the things that needed doing next. Kale Va, garrison commander of Verath 6, last survivor of a unit that had stood when standing meant nothing but the choice to stand, looked at all of it and made a decision. When the War Council met to discuss what had happened here and they would meet, because the galaxy was watching and the galaxy would need words for this, he would give his full account. Every detail, every minute. What 42nd Drop Brigade had done and how they had done it and what it had cost and what it had saved. He would tell them what humans were when the door was closing. He would make sure no one forgot.